Well, welcome to the final of our 6 Equity Snapshot Forums with our fellows. Before we get going, I'd just like to start by acknowledging the country in which I'm currently located. Today I'm in the Darawal Nation, and I acknowledge with deep respect the traditional custodians of this land, the Wadi Wadi people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging, and to the Aboriginal community that continue to care for country. I stand for a future that profoundly respects and acknowledges Aboriginal perspectives, culture, language and history, and a continued effort to fight for Aboriginal justice and rights, paving the way for a strong future. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sarah O'Shea. I'm the Director of the National Centre for Student Equity in Higher Education, which we call NESHE for short. NESHE is housed at Curtin University and is funded by the Commonwealth Government with a dedicated mission to improve the higher education outcomes, access, participation, retention, success and completion rates for marginalised and disadvantaged people. We do this through a variety of strategies, including research, practice and policy. One of our key programs is the Equity Fellowship Programme. And today I have the great pleasure of introducing one of our Equity Fellows, David Eckstein, who was awarded a year-long Equity Fellowship to explore "There's nothing inevitable about exclusion, choices and issues in career support for students with disability." As you would be aware, this year has been particularly difficult, with our fellows experiencing various levels of lockdown. And David, who's located in Victoria, has been in lockdown for the last few months. And as you can imagine, that has presented a lot of challenges for this research. But still, he has managed to produce some really great preliminary findings. We've taken a slightly different approach to this presentation and asked each of the fellows to prepare a short TED-style talk that focuses on a specific element of their research. This is followed by a live Q&A session, which today will be facilitated by Matt Brett. Thank you, Matt, who is a leading expert in this field. So, without further ado, I'd like to now stop sharing my screen and hand over to Nina, who will play our short video from David. Thank you.
There's nothing inevitable about exclusion. We make choices about how we prepare our students for life after university, especially our students who live with disability. And this idea that there's nothing inevitable about exclusion is a key reason I work with people with disability. And it's a persistent form of exclusion that prompted my research fellowship. Specifically, compared to their mainstream counterparts, students with disability remain more likely to be unemployed after graduation. And if they do get work, they're more likely to be in jobs that don't use their university skills or education. And they are also underrepresented in employers' graduate programs. They make up only 2% of participants in these important employment pathways. Now, we know that more targeted career services for students with disability are needed at university in Australia. And we know that universities continue to experience barriers to providing them, but we don't know why these barriers persist. They include things like scarce resources and lack of service integration, but we don't know why, as a sector, these things continue to obstruct targeted service provision. And that's what my fellowship investigates. Now, there is nothing inevitable about this state of affairs. My fellowship findings are drawn from national surveys with students and staff, online staff focus groups, and case study interviews, and staff are very clear about what they need. There's a strong collaborative theme that runs through the things that staff say would help them provide more targeted career support for students with disability. And the top 3 things are more collaboration with external stakeholders, followed by staff training, followed by more collaboration with internal stakeholders. But there are things that complicate fulfilling these needs. And a big issue is that students and staff see careers matters differently. Of course, you'd expect that because our experience is different. But the thing to note is that as a body, we as staff could be much better attuned to how students with disability feel about their careers. We'll look at 3 examples for now. Personal career goals, an example of a career challenge, and how students feel about engaging with that challenge. So personal career goals first. Survey feedback suggests that at this fundamental level, there is a huge difference between students' careers thinking and staff perception of it. For example, more than 70% of students with disability say yes, they know what work they want to do, but if you put this question to university staff, in your opinion, do most students with disability know what work they want to do? Barely 30% of staff say yes. And when asked about the challenges students with disability face getting the work they want, students and staff agree on the number one challenge, which is people making inaccurate assumptions about their abilities. But staff and students disagree on the second most important challenge. Staff nominate unconscious bias. Students say it's being asked to share disability information with employers, and sharing disability information with employers is fraught for many students. About 1/3 of students with disabilities say they feel able to do this, but only 12% of staff thought that students would feel able to share disability information with employers. So as a group, we're underestimating students' willingness to engage with this difficult challenge. And these discrepancies warrant further investigation because they represent more than just differences of opinion. There could be that there are different factors behind it. Low careers confidence might lead some students with disabilities to present more readily to staff, or they might hide their aspirations from staff because they're used to people downplaying their aspirations simply because they have disability. And that is a real concern. Not being attuned to the careers thinking of students with disability risks imposing career limiting mindsets on them. It risks cutting careers thinking off from who they are, and that's the very foundation that their careers thinking should be grounded in. Instead of encouraging this foundation, we actually risk framing the disabilities that students manage as powerful careers disablers, when we should be doing the exact opposite. We should be focused on enabling their strategic, evidence-based consideration of themselves as emerging professionals. In fact, their entire university experience should progressively help them better understand deeply personal career development questions, such as how they want to use their skills, what it is about them that makes them good or will make them good at using them, what they want their work to mean, the places where they can best make their professional contributions, and what they'd like to learn next. Now, these are the underpinnings of productive career confidence, and they're also exactly what employers look for in prospective employees. They're also at the heart of current career development theory. It's referred to in the literature as a constructivist approach, or the inside-out approach to careers education. And it's particularly relevant to students with disability because they're particularly at risk of internalizing negative assumptions or attitudes about their skills and abilities. Now, when you create space for students with disability to focus on their abilities and their aspirations, it can unleash their ability to redefine the role that their experience of disability plays in their career development. I've seen disability become a source of career strength for some, while many have also discovered that as far as their career development is concerned, their disability is the least interesting thing about them. Now, this kind of career support has to be tailored to the particular obstacle that each student faces. And my fellowship has found that university careers practitioners identify that very point. They're very upfront about saying training is a priority to help us develop expertise in this specialist area. So we need to consider formal training, but we've also got the chance to use this to help with the issue of lack of service integration. This is our chance to get on the same page. And my fellowship highlights that staff from different parts of the university have different and not necessarily compatible perspectives about what helps students with disability get and keep meaningful work. If we're to give students with disability consistent messages, we need to understand each other's professional positions. And a good place to start would be for the sector to use existing expertise in some areas to upskill colleagues in others. For example, careers and disability staff can upskill each other, not to become expert in each other's work, but to understand more about what each other's foundation competencies are. And we can do this by collaborating on careers initiatives that benefit students with disability, and in doing so, we can develop a common language for disability career development learning. And having a common language means more efficient and coordinated employability effort that would better integrate traditionally separate university services. One project-based example of this kind of service integration is partnership with a Disability Employment Services Provider, or DES for short. Currently, universities can host a DES provider on campus through the NDCO's Uni Specialist Employment Partnership, or USEP program, or Wise Employment's GradWise program. These arrangements have helped some universities facilitate students' access to disability-confident employers and facilitate closer collaboration between disability services and careers education in the process. But entering into these arrangements can be complex. There are currently 14 universities with DES partnerships, and my fellowship highlights that there are key enablers that would help other universities develop relationships with DES providers, such as staff having access to information about partnership guidelines and choices, and staff having access to precedent, to examples of university collaboration with DES providers, and staff having access to a safe place to discuss issues with colleagues from early adopter universities. So the emerging opportunity that the higher education sector has is to reduce the barrier of service separation by taking a more integrated approach to supporting the career development of our students with disability. And we can do this by tailoring activities that respond to the needs of each student. In the scheme of things represented by this picture, the student will occupy a different place in the support hierarchy depending on where they're at the time and depending on the particular careers issues that they're dealing with. They might be using a little or a lot of support from different university areas, such as the Careers Office, Disability or Work Integrated Learning, academic skills support, faculty or employers, but also each other. At Swinburne University, for example, students have been brought together to work in a student community of practice, where they experience the benefit of belonging to a community of career development learners and the benefits of supporting each other. And this collaborative approach puts students in more control of their career management when they leave university, because they get a broader, more informed careers base from which to transition to the world of work. And this brings me to the point that I'd like to finish on. The question for us as a sector is, how do we make this happen? Well, staff collaboration, enabling each other's ability, sharing information and resources between universities as well as departments are key aims of the National Disability Career Development Learning community of practice that's emerging from this fellowship. You're invited to come and experience this community of practice online at December sessions of the National Association of Graduate Careers Advisory Services, or NAGCAS conference, and the Australian Tertiary Education Network on Disability, or ATEND Pathways 15 conference. There'll be tips, discussion, and information sharing about the choices and issues that city and regional colleagues have engaged with to develop targeted careers services for their students with disability to help you develop your own strategies. By working together, we can improve students' ability to identify and get work that's meaningful for them. We'll be doing this at a national level. We'll be helping them understand and be valued for their skills, abilities, and professional aspirations. We'll be making their inclusion more routine, and we'll be doing this for students that would otherwise remain marginalised. This speaks directly to the higher education sector's mission to be a civilising influence in society, and it comes down to making these kinds of choices. They're choices we need to make. We can help each other in the process, and that's what it means to say there's nothing inevitable about exclusion. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the Disability Career Development Learning community of practice. Thanks for listening.
Well, I'm sure you'll agree with me that that was a terrific video and great overview of David's research to date. And now I'm going to pass over to Matt and David, but just before I do, a reminder that we are taking live questions today, and we have one question in the Q&A at the moment. It'd be great to get some more in there so that Matt can really quiz David on some of this research. Over to you two, Matt and David.
Thank you, Sarah. And first off, I'd just like to congratulate the National Centre for what has been a fantastic week of snapshot seminars from the Equity Fellows this year. And what a great note to end it on this week with David and Tim's work today. We heard earlier today some really interesting work from Tim Pittman around just the volume of students with disabilities in the sector and some of the issues that they face. And today we've heard from David around that transition to employment and the challenges there. And a really, I just want to commend you, David, for what is a really good, very impressive presentation. You kicked it off with also a really powerful quote. You know, there's nothing inevitable about exclusion, and indicated that's really kind of motivated you to sort of pursue this work. But I just wonder, is there something a little bit more? Is there something that really drove you to put your hat in the ring for this fellowship and to do the work that you've done, which is fantastic?
Thank you, Matt. Look, yes, there is. There's a couple of things, and one of them was the history that I have working with students with disability since I began working as a careers consultant almost 10 years ago. And the students showed me then, right from the start, just how responsive they are to modern ideas about career development, and how courageously they engage with those things, and how powerful social constructs of disability can be. But then I had the opportunity to lead the implementation of the Accessibility Careers Hub at Swinburne University. And when I was invited to do that, it was the first time that I was able to concentrate and specialise in that work and to do nothing else. And I think that was an opportunity really to experience the power of a whole of organisation approach to this issue of providing career support for students with disability. That really crystallised a lot for me, because it involved collaboration with disability services. There's tremendous interest and enthusiasm from employers that was demonstrated to me over and over again through the work done to help set up the Accessibility Careers Hub. And again, you know, the responsiveness of the students, they just demonstrate time and time again that if we create the right space for them, they teach us everything we need to know in order to help them. And therefore this fellowship was a really logical step to apply for this fellowship, because my experience to date showed me that there is no one way of doing this, that we have to be responsive to the array of needs. Yes, there are broad themes that the students present in the needs that they have, but we need to become better as a sector at understanding those needs and how they present in different students, and what works for some students and what doesn't work for others. So it was, you know, it's been a long process, but things really came together in a big way for me by being given the chance to do that work at Swinburne.
And I've got to say that really shines through in what you've shared with us today, David. Some recurrent themes there around kind of working together and collaboration, the distinct skill sets of DLOs and careers practitioners. With that experience, kind of having that specialist careers focus with the fellowship itself, is there anything that surprised you? Is there anything that's really challenged your assumptions as you've been given the opportunity to take a deeper dive in this domain?
Well, yes, and perhaps it shouldn't have. Yeah, but it did surprise me to discover, or actually I think just to see spelled out the the kind of disparity between staff and student perception, and the extent of that disparity between the way in which students understand their career challenges and the way that staff understand students with disabilities careers thinking. It's a huge difference, and the exciting thing about it is that we can do quite a lot quite quickly, I think, to remedy that situation and to be in more touch with our students. But one of the other things that that did surprise me was the inadvertent barriers that embed, in a way, service siloing, despite our efforts to the contrary. And it's been, you know, well documented in the literature that providing career support for students with disability is a specialist area, and it needs to be recognised as such. You know, those are the arguments that are made, and I think people are very alive to that, and it says a lot about Australia's careers practitioners that they take these matters very seriously, and it came up over and over again in the various data streams for the fellowship project. That, you know, we need specialist training. We don't have the required expertise, but that in itself can become a self-fulfilling barrier. And in a way, if you'd forgive me for saying, I think the profession underestimates its readiness to take this next step and become upskilled, to develop specialist expertise. Not that everyone has to be a specialist in this area, but I think the way in which this concern about being adequately qualified conspires against us is it replicates an issue that industry experiences. It replicates an issue actually that our students experience and that we counsel them against. And that issue is, I'm not ready. You know, I don't know everything yet. I'm not good enough. I'm not perfect. I'm not expert enough. And we don't need to be expert in order to take the first step. I think that's I think that issue, you know, is very informative for me, and I think helps us a lot understand how we can take the next step. So that was a huge surprise for me to discover that issue and have that spelled out in a number of ways by a number of different people.
I've got to say, David, that that surprise is mirrored by some of the questions that are coming through in the Q&A, where, for example, we have Jane Anderson sort of saying she finds it shocking that your survey indicated only 30% of staff thought students with disabilities knew what sort of work they wanted to do. And kind of related to that from one of your former colleagues, I think, Anthony Gartner, kind of questioning how did we get to this point? How is it that we've got this disconnect between, you know, what students kind of think of their sense of self, their aspirations for transition to employment, and how staff are seeing things in such a different way?
Mm. Well, look, I think that's a whole project all on its own, and it would be one of the many fascinating things to follow up on. But at this point, in a way, I think it's kind of logical that we find ourselves in this situation, because the university environment is siloed. It's the way the institution has grown up, or the way the sector has grown up, I think. And we have different areas of expertise. And if I were to just sit with that for a moment, everyone has an opinion about careers advice, and everyone has careers advice to give, because we all have experience with careers. And that doesn't mean that each other's careers advice is invalid, although it is a central, or it is a foundation element of careers advising or careers counselling that aligns with current career development literature, is that the student is the person who's expert in their own circumstances, so we don't tell them what to do. But it can feel very seductive to give people advice about what they should do based on incomplete knowledge of their circumstances. And so therefore, if you're in faculty, you'll have an opinion about what's useful for the student. But if you're in disability services, your professional focus is different, and you're more alive, I think, to the issues that students with disability live with. And so your perspective will be different. If you're a careers consultant, your perspective will be different again. And if you're part of the student support network, then your perspective will be different again. And it was another finding through the project was that in some cases the students' external support network can end up pushing students into courses that they have no interest in, or that they have no ability in, because the objective overrides the student's own aspiration. And so there's this hornet's nest, if you like, of competing voices that make it very difficult for students with disability. But as I said, we can do something about this quite readily, I think, by acknowledging that difference instead of being deaf to it. And that is something that would be very powerful, I think, and that would inform very achievable training, again, as was suggested through the focus groups for this fellowship. Doesn't have to be, you know, yet another bit of compliance that people have to put up with, but could be part of their existing work. It's just that by collaborating with colleagues, we get help with it. So, you know, there's opportunities for the sector to upskill itself. And I think that's particularly exciting. Yeah, it's awful that we find ourselves on the one hand in this situation, but we've got this tremendous opportunity to do something about it. I think we're uniquely poised to do something about it, because, you know, these findings didn't come out of anywhere, out of nowhere. I mean, they came on the back of generations of work by dedicated professionals. In a way, I think it's no accident that you know, that we're finding this out now, because the ground has been, you know, prepared for so long that I think the sector is ready for this.
I just want to pick up on this notion of silos, and often taken the view that universities are the ultimate silo organisation. It's comprised of distinct disciplines with their own conventions and traditions, and they don't often speak to each other in a common language. And even this week, with the various fellows with their presentations, we've seen various disciplinary traditions coming at equity issues from such very different vantage points, and that's been a real strength of this week's presentations from my perspective. But this notion of different sort of skill sets or silos within disability support and career support coming together it should be something that universities are adept at being able to manage, because that's what universities are, sort of collections of these little silos of activities. And I wonder, just picking up on a question from Janine Delahunty, you know, how do you get the common knowledge? How do you get the sort of common language and discourse happening but between, you know, two groups that are kind of working side by side in universities?
Yeah, well, it started at Swinburne, you know, and thank you for mentioning Anthony, because you know, he's a key reason that I come to be doing this work, because it was his invitation to the careers office at Swinburne to collaborate that started it. So someone has to make the first move, and I think that's the answer to the question. You know, how do you get started? Well, you take the first step, and I think, you know, we take the first step with a spirit of collaboration, understanding that we don't know enough to you know, to have all the answers, and we don't need them, because we do have, because of the very reason that these silos exist. You know, this is in the university. I once heard someone liken it to you know, a modern city-state. You know, it has that many pockets of cultures and experience and expertise in it. Well, how could it not be siloed? Universities have been working very hard for a long time to develop cross-faculty collaboration, and I think this is a variation on a theme. So the experience is there, I think.
Another feature of that, I suppose, sort of bridging or getting sort of common ground between sort of cultures and areas of specialisation is in work integrated learning. We've got a question from Nadine Zacharias, sort of exploring the notion of what work integrated learning might do in terms of bridging, you know, the university silo and the industry silo in some ways as well, which opens up a new field of collaboration with academic staff that are designing curriculum too. to support and enable that bridge. Does that pose issues? Does that pose challenges from your perspective and from your research around what role work integration?
Well, all of the above, but it also poses tremendous opportunities. And anyone who has worked in work integrated learning will attest to the fact that disability is a highly relevant issue, because there we experience the student's anxiety typically of, or often, of not wanting to share disability information, for very good reasons and for very understandable reasons. Because once you share that information, you can't take it back. And some people do experience discrimination. It would be idle to pretend that doesn't happen. And so I think that anxiety is very, very real. The difficulty it creates for people in work integrated learning is that it compromises relationships with employers. It actually compromises the student's own learning when they enter an environment that's not prepared for them because they didn't feel safe to share the information required to make the necessary accommodations. So there are opportunities, I think, to help students and employers better understand what's involved. It is something that requires concerted effort on the part of employers, but as employers demonstrate to us, it's something that they're interested in doing. It's something that they're already doing, and more enlightened employers, more and more, are saying that we make accommodations for everyone. Why shouldn't we make accommodations for people with disability? In fact, we do, and then they trot out the enabling communities that they run, the different ways in which they accommodate what some of them, I think, beautifully refer to as individual work styles rather than accommodations for people with disability. The difficulty, I think, with work integrated learning, or the challenge, can be taking away agency from the student. And this resonates with some of the findings in the fellowship, because throughout it, students with disability demonstrate a spectrum of attitudes towards careers thinking. And there are students who are very independent or highly agentic, if you like, about their careers thinking and about the way in which they're preparing for their transition to the world of work. And they do a lot by themselves, and they consult and they draw on resources. And there are people at the other end of the spectrum that, again, for very understandable reasons, feel that it's actually the university's job to get them work. And so therefore, I just need to concentrate on my studies. And again, I think this is a whole other story that has a lot of complexity to it. But the danger is, for work integrated learning, is that students hand over their responsibility and indeed their requests or statements of just this kind of sentiment in the fellowship findings. Find me an opportunity. This is the student voice. Find me the opportunity and negotiate the adjustments for me with the employer. And that might seem like a reasonable thing to do or a helpful thing to do, but what it does is deny the student with disability the opportunity to develop their skills in a safe place with that very difficult theme of sharing disability information with employers, negotiating adjustments. We have to use work integrated learning as an opportunity to develop those skills, not deny them to the students.
Agree with that, absolutely. And we've got a question here from Nagari Robinson, who's sort of wanting to get a bit more information around this kind of challenge of disclosure. And I might just augment this notion of disclosure to employers with disclosure to the university as well, because if we're to create a safe space where students can develop the skills and develop that agency to disclose and find ways of navigating their world and getting the adjustments and support that they might need. I wonder whether or not there is a distinction between getting the educational adjustments and getting the employment-related adjustments as well.
Well, I think that's a great question, and it's a great point. And in fact, inadvertently, again through the different data streams from the fellowship project, students make that very point. They inadvertently make that very point. They link their student experience with their experience of the university with their degree of confidence to engage with the world of work. And the issue of sharing disability information with employers comes up in that context. And I think it's a very good point that, especially for students with disability who come from high school where they have been advocated for, and they find themselves in a university setting where they have to advocate for themselves, nonetheless, with the help of a disability liaison office, but they still have to advocate for themselves. They have to self-nominate. It's like a dry run for what needs to happen in the world of work. And so I think it can be made into very good practice to help students feel safe having these kinds of conversations, and also helping them understand the context that their experience of disability actually plays in the broader experience, if you like. At university, it's the course. In the workforce, it's entering a workplace. And I think it's easy to overestimate the amount that people need to know. And I think that's a good example of how relevant negotiating adjustments for university engagement can help with preparation for entering the workforce, because the university doesn't need to know everything about you in order to make adjustments for you. Yes, things need to be documented with the central point, with the disability liaison office, in the way that things need to be documented with HR if they're going to if the organisation is going to interview you for a job. But faculty doesn't need to know details about your disability. You know, the people interviewing you don't need to know details about your disability. So I think the two things are very complementary, and there's a lot that we can use to help prepare students by drawing on their university experience.
We heard this morning from Tim Pittman, again, just the reminder of the volume of students that we're enrolling across the sector with disability, and also encouraging us to adopt a universal design for learning approach. I wonder, in this kind of transition to employment, is it about adjustment? Is it about having disclosed need, or is it about finding ways of making that interface in that transition to employment as accessible as it can be from a universal design for learning or universal design for employment perspective?
Look, I think it's both. I'm not quite sure if I've got a handle on your question, but
yeah. I might kind of rephrase it a little. Some of the questions that have come through have had I suppose, a sort of theme about making adjustments for students with disabilities.
Yes.
And disclosing to make those changes. But I wonder, is there a world, or is there a way in which that transition to employment can occur where there is no need to disclose at all, because everything the student might need is accessible and customisable to their own unique needs as a design feature? Well,
yes, yeah, that's the ideal that we're working towards. Absolutely, and so I think we need to be coming at it from both angles. I think we need a universal design approach to learning that assumes the presence of all equity groups, including students with disability. But that doesn't mean that specialist support isn't also required in order to help students take advantage and make the most of a universally designed learning experience. So I think we need to be doing both. And you know, there are people that argue that we shouldn't have specialist support. You know, we should just be working towards a naturally inclusive environment. And the counter argument to that is that, well, that means that you're asking the current generation to wait, and that they can't be included yet. And people associate this argument with the provision of quotas in the workforce. and that we shouldn't have quotas because they're undesirable, and they're evidence of the fact that, you know, that the workplace is imperfect, and we should instead be trying to change the workplace. Or we should be trying to do both. I think if we're dealing with systemic discrimination, which is what people with disability experience, then I think we can be smart and try and change the culture and the environment at the same time as we try to remove the systemic barriers in whatever way is practical.
I think for the participants that are here today and throughout the course of this week, we wouldn't be here unless we were committed to some form of positive social change that's making the world more inclusive. You mentioned in your last response the kind of notion of not abandoning the current generation and doing both at the same time, changing our practice and trying to change the world of employment as well. I wonder, for that current generation that have been severely disrupted by COVID and are going into a labour market that they may well have recessionary or even depression-like features to it. Do you see, this is a question from collaborator through the course of this year, Tim Pittman, sort of questioning, do we see any COVID-related effects in terms of access to work, integrated learning, in terms of transition to employment for students with disabilities, or is it too early to tell in terms of what your research has been able to identify?
Well, as to what happens next year, I think we need to wait and see, but I think there's room for cautious optimism. I mean, colleagues in industry liaison have told me that people are still running, organisations are still running graduate programs. You know, some have stopped recruiting, others have not. So there is, I think there's a mosaicked response to COVID. The opportunity that that the workforce has is to identify the barriers that exist in traditional assumptions that have been made about work. And those traditional assumptions, such as having to front up to an office every day, have been shown to be baseless. And they provide, I think that learning provides the world of work with an opportunity to better embrace people with disability and to not fall victim. And I say that because they miss out, as well as the people that don't get work, but the organisations miss out when they don't employ people with disability. So I say very deliberately that they have a chance not to fall victim to the assumption that you need to engage in a traditional way, just because it's always been done that way. So I think the opportunity that COVID provides us with is to engage in a more productive way with people with disability, to allow them to use the skills that they have.
Again, just want to affirm and congratulate you for your approach, David, because I think this focus on the positives, on seeing the opportunities and the enthusiasm with which you're approaching those opportunities, I think is to be commended. We're getting a couple of questions that are coming through, just to sort of backtrack a little bit on this kind of notion of self-disclosure. And in some respects, some universities, and we've got a kind of question from Anthony Gartner saying that he's currently trying to automate, or has automated the learning adjustment of learning access plans, such that students can, without having to disclose too much information about themselves, just getting having information shared about the functional implications of their circumstances, are getting adjustments being put in place almost in an automated fashion. We've got another question that sort of came through on the chat from Kelly Branston, sort of suggesting that there is a good a sound basis for really promoting self-advocacy. I sort of wonder, do you see a sort of tension, or is it a little bit of both? Are they mutually exclusive? Can you automate these processes but still inculcate and support students' self-advocacy skills simultaneously?
Well, to the extent that students have to engage with the system in order for it to automate for them, it makes a parallel, I think, with the systems that the world of work has in place for people when they make job applications. You have the opportunity to tick the box and to share disability information with an employer, and I think that's the kind of system that Anthony and Kelly are describing. There's a whole conversation behind that, though, as to why a student or a prospective employee would want to do just that. Why would they want to tick the box, and why would they want to share the information? And so what industry has learned is that if they want people to do this, they have to be very clear about the reasons for asking for it. And that's what we explain to students, is for them to understand how their information will be used. And if it's to be used simply to gather demographic data, well, okay. But if it's to be used to provide you with accommodation so that you can do your best and demonstrate your ability instead of wasting energy on trying to engage with a barrier, then that's a reasonable thing to do. And I think, therefore, it's a reasonable thing for a university. That, by the way, I think is being asked increasingly as a sector. We're about to be asked, I understand it, to make adjustments and reporting on accommodations for students with disability in irregular cycles, almost on an ad hoc basis. And so this kind of automation, I think, is going to be necessary for the sector. But I think it does have a benefit, again, if it's curated properly by the university for the purposes of student education. So we explain, this is why we're doing it, these are the benefits, these are the things you need to consider. Then I think it stands a chance of being very positive for most people. It doesn't mean that we can assume that that's going to suit everyone. And it doesn't mean that we can assume that there won't be people who will fall through the cracks. So we still need the system to be driven by the kind of expertise that people like Anthony and Kelly have.
And dare I say, and to sort of echo some of your earlier responses, the work and the professionalism and the dedication that's been brought to the field of disability practice, careers practice and higher education overall means that there is a huge amount of knowledge, a huge amount of experience in these things, and can look to the future being very, very positive if we tap into those skills and bring it to bear to the problems that we're facing. On questions of employment, there's two questions coming through the Q&A. One kind of picks up on this issue around what is the university's responsibility to students with disabilities looking to progress to the labour market. So Jasmine McDonald's asking, well, do universities have a role as big employers to recognise the extent of exclusion in the labour market, and preferentially maybe include more targeted programs of employing graduates with disabilities as part of their own employment practices?
Yes. Absolutely.
Yes.
I think that's a great point. I think that's a fantastic point. And why shouldn't universities model the sort of engagement that we would encourage in industry? I think that's such a fundamentally important point that I really don't see how you could argue to the contrary. We're supposed to be repositories of learning, of expertise, of civilizing influences, and we are those things. And so we have the opportunity to model inclusive practice, and also, therefore, to become a source of better knowledge about the issues that this kind of inclusive practice involves, because it's not necessarily straightforward. Employing anyone is not necessarily straightforward, and so, you know, part of the work of the Accessibility Careers Hub at Swinburne is just that. It's to provide one of a number of sources that exist of information for employers about how to be more disability confident, and so, you know, I wrote a list of issues, and I gathered information from the Australian Association of Graduate Employers at one of their disability roundtables, and you asked the question there: what sorts of accommodations can employers make for applicants with disability? And the room might go quiet after about 15 minutes. There is a storm of suggestions of things that they do already. Yeah, and so I think that if the university as a sector does not proactively engage with this opportunity to have targeted recruitment programs for people with disability, then as an employer, you know, we risk being left behind.
And dare I say, missing out on some of the fantastic talent that exists within the pool of graduates with disabilities.
Indeed.
You mentioned before, in response to sort of COVID-related questions, that everyone is working from home. You know, I haven't set foot in the workplace for God knows how long. It's been a long time. And there's some evidence that that's been positive. Nadine Zacharias is saying that's been positive for staff at the University of Sydney. Did your research identify anything along those lines for students with disabilities, that they have found these COVID times to be more conducive to preparing themselves for that transition to work?
It wasn't something that I addressed specifically. The focus of the project was on the enabling factors and the factors that create barriers to targeted service provision for students with disability. But the students did volunteer anxiety as a result of COVID. They felt that universities weren't responding to them as well as they were before COVID. And I think also we need to acknowledge that the majority of students with disability in Australia that enrol do so on campus, and that look at it. You know, I'll go out on a limb and generalise, but many people with disability spend their time completely occupied, being engaged with their course and managing their disability. You know, work might come a distant third for some of them, and so university is an important means of contact, and so taking that away is something that works well for some, but creates an added load or difficulty for others. I think it's important to acknowledge that.
I think we are running short of time, but just very quickly to finish it up, David. What's next? What's next for you? What's next for the fellowship? What's next for some of the ideas that you've been playing with in this fellowship? And again, congratulations on what looks to be a fantastic piece of work.
Oh, well, thank you, and thank you again for joining me today. I really appreciate your company. And where do you start? I mean, to be prioritised for further research is that phrase gets quite a beating in the report. But I think the immediate things are the community of practice. I think that's really exciting, and I think nurturing that, providing resources for it, is a key priority. I think the issue of multiple disability as opposed to someone experiencing a single disability appears to affect people's careers thinking, but that's a very superficial appraisal and warrants, I think, targeted research. There's a lot of research that could be done to to help inform the issue of staff training, to identify which specific practices are actually the most effective in specific circumstances.
I might just jump in there, David.
Please.
We are getting close to time, but again, congratulations, well done. Look forward to that community of practice delivering some great dividends and having a world where the transition of graduates with disabilities to employment is a seamless and free of any disparities.
Matt, thank you, and Sarah and the Centre, thank you for having me. It's been a great year.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure, David, and it continues to be a pleasure. Thank you both for just such a really interesting presentation, such fascinating insights into this field, and we really look forward to your report coming out, David. I'm conscious of time, but I did just want to remind everyone that we do have all the webinars now up on the NESHE webpage. And I'm just popping that up for anyone who may not be aware of where our website is. So if you've not already engaged with the Centre, then please do. Once you go on the website, you will be prompted to enroll and get our newsletter. So we send a newsletter out every 6 to 7 weeks. And it sort of is just a way of keeping up to date with what's happening across the whole equity sector. As we've said, this is our final webinar. We've had a terrific week of just the most diverse presentations. This is never anything that is ever possible without the work of a lot of people behind the scenes. So I do just want to acknowledge today the NESHE team, particularly Nina Marie Thomas, who has done a phenomenal amount of work in the background. Those of you who actually asked for a booklet will hopefully have a hard copy booklet, or if not, it will be coming very soon. The postal system has messed up our delivery a little bit. If you would like a booklet, then you can also view these online. And if you ask Nina very nicely, she may even send you one. So we hope you've enjoyed this week of the Fellows Forum. And we just want to thank everyone for their ongoing support, and of course, all our presenters for the week. And with that, I'll say goodbye. And thank you again, Matt and David.